May 16th Victim Compensation Board meeting. For those of you in the room that are appearing on a specific agenda item or wish to offer public comment, the microphones at the podium and tables are directional and require that you hold them fairly close to your mouth when speaking to ensure that your testimony is captured by our audio equipment. For members and participants who are appearing via Zoom, if you cannot hear the presenter, please use the comment feature to note that as staff are monitoring the comments in real time. Council, would you please call the roll?
Member Becton.
Present.
Member Johnson.
Here.
Chair Ravel.
Present.
Item 1 is the approval of the minutes for the March 21st, 2024 board meeting.
Is there any discussion, additions, or corrections to the minutes from the board? Let's see. Do I have a motion to approve item 1?
I move approval of the March 21st, 2024 minutes.
Second it.
Is there any public comment on this item via Zoom here in Sacramento or at the Martinez location?
Seeing none, Council, please call the roll.
The motion for consideration before the board is approval of the March 21st, 2024 board meeting minutes. Member Becton.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes. The next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. As any items discussed during public comment have not been agendized, the board is not permitted to take any action on these matters at this meeting. Please note, if you wish to offer public comment regarding items 6 or 7, there will be a separate call for public comment when each item is heard by the board. For those on the phone, if you previously indicated your desire to offer comments during this meeting, we will be calling on you by name or phone number. For those participating via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to offer public comment, and we will acknowledge you and let you know when it is your turn to speak.
I see Mr. Tenoyan has his hand raised. Please, Mr. Tenoyan.
Thank you. Good morning to the Honorable Board, to its hardworking staff and council, and to all survivors of crime and their advocates. My name is Erroneous, and I am a 28-year-old Armenian American from sunny Burbank, California, and a graduate of UC Berkeley with over a decade in cybersecurity and data analytics experience, currently protecting the magic for the happiest place on earth. I come before you to share my insights as a constituent who is affected and has loved ones and neighbors affected by the violence in our communities. But what many don't know about me is that I myself am a survivor of violent crime. Whether it is my city, my county of Los Angeles, or my golden state of California, more needs to be done. First, the regulations of the board have not been updated in over a decade. We have new regulations going into effect on July 1st, and no outreach has been conducted to the hundreds of cities and law enforcement agencies, the 58 counties and their victim centers and district attorneys, the hundreds of courts in the state and their honorable judges, or any other stakeholder across the state. The regulations present untested implementations that I am concerned do not do victims justice. The newly proposed Office of Regulatory Counsel should make sure that these regulations benefit victims first and foremost, to partially divest this board of its quasi-legislative powers and place it back into a more democratic executive branch agency, leading CalVCB and its council to better focus on implementing crime victim statutes and regulations and quasi-judicial resolutions of them within the agency. Second, CalVCB does not do enough to ensure all Californians come within the protections of its ambit. Accessibility is limited to in-person meetings in Northern California or phone or Zoom connections with few meetings. We need a CalVCB meeting every month, and we need satellite opportunities around the state. This is a historic election year, plagued with political violence across academic institutions, communities, and even against political candidates who have as difficult of a time funding mental health and security expenses as California's victims have with getting their own funding from CalVCB, when psychologically injured, financially injured, physically injured, or threatened with physical injury as a result of crime. We need victims and advocates and many others, such as academics and legal scholars, to be invited to present, share their screen or PowerPoints, share analytics, data, and technical information, and engage in dialogue with the board and stakeholders. Third, CalVCB is taking claim denials and claim underpayments to an extreme. For every $1 going to victims out of $200 million, $3 does not go to victims. Its meeting agendas track legislation which rarely makes it through the legislative process, yet the meeting agendas do not discuss active or ongoing litigation with the CalVCB and claimants or parties. Every other executive branch or legislative branch body that meets publicly includes at least a list of active litigation to be discussed in closed session. Claimants who receive declaratory relief, injunctive relief, writ relief, or any other relief from the courts are faced with more systemic injustice due to lack of access to counsel, deference to the agency, lack of consistent or contemporary case law, all while living within the catastrophe that remains in the wake of violent crime. We need regulations, statutes, governor's executive orders, trial and appellate court rulings, and court general and emergency orders by presiding judges and justices that bridge these gaps for crime victim litigants, both in cases involving the CalVCB and any other litigation where crime victimization is at the crux. We need elected or appointed judges to be trauma-informed, bias-resistant, and passionate about balancing the interests of crime victims above the interests of the government or the crime perpetrators. Fourth, law enforcement and county victim centers can do more. We need better CalVCB county contracts, expansions of mandatory and discretionary services to victims in the penal code, better performance monitoring, better technology and security, and more cooperation between cities, counties, and CalVCB. We need better policy manuals and training for CalVCB staff, beyond the wiki manual and other internal resources. We need access to selecting local administrative law judges with the Office of Administrative Hearings for claimants and their agency hearings, who know their communities more than Sacramento does. We need access to the subpoena powers and verification powers authorized for cities, counties, and CalVCB. We need access to discovery and agency claims, as well as evidentiary hearings with full due process and examination rights. We need increased subrogation rights and remedies for the CalVCB to recoup from the losses incurred by Californians as a result of the crime perpetrators. Fifth, the federal government is implementing new regulations to reform many aspects of crime victim claims administered by the states. I recently attended the National Crime Victims' Rights Week Candlelight Vigil on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. on April 24th, as one of only 2 Burbank advocates in attendance, the other being my esteemed fellow alumni from UC Berkeley, now working on the Hill. CalVCB has not had any public discussions about the implications of these federal regulations and how they too can be incorporated within claim processing systems, agency claim appeals, agency claim hearings, and litigation over victim claims. Nor has CalVCB discussed how they plan to meet federal requirements for civil rights, including ADA accommodations for individuals with disabilities. On May 31st, I will be launching a press release regarding my vision for crime victim reform across the state, with a focus on all the litigation against the CalVCB, all the conflicting regulations and statutes, all 58 county victim center contracts, and my own expansive requests for CalVCB's public records. I want everyone listening to know that this year is going to be the year where we Californians bring change to an agency and system that desperately needs it and has needed it for decades. Victims and survivors are suffering. Their wallets are drying up. Their health is deteriorating by the day, week, month, and year. They lose housing, lose employment, lose credit scores, and they lose their electoral rights to have their voice heard in our democracy. We hope now we will be heard. We are looking in every corner. We will stand up for every victim and survivor, and we will make sure that Sacramento serves all Californians equally. Thank you all for your public service. And remember that supporting our fellow neighbors from all walks of life is the Burbank way.
Thank you, Mr. Sonoyan. I'll just note at the prior board meeting, the federal regulations changes, the VOCA regulations were an item for discussion. I believe that's reflected in the minutes, but we appreciate your advocacy and thank you for appearing before us today. Is there any additional public comment? I'm seeing none. I think we can move on to item 3.
Item 3 is the Executive Officer Statement, which will be presented by Executive Officer Linda Gledhill.
Good morning. As you are all aware, the state is facing a very large budget deficit this year and next year. The governor's May revise came out late last week, and the details numerous ways California aims to close the state's budget deficit. There will be multiple impacts to Cal VCB and the programs we administer, and I wanted to update the board on those. First, the governor announced a plan to eliminate approximately 10,000 vacant state positions starting in 2025-26. The Department of Finance will be working with all departments to identify those positions. At this point, we don't know how many positions we may lose funding for. Cal VCB has been able to fill many of its vacancies, and we continue to fill critical positions. More significantly, all California state departments have been told to permanently reduce ongoing operations by 7.95%, beginning in 2024-25. As a small state department, Cal VCB will feel the impact of those budget reductions. We have a fairly fiscally conservative, historically lean budget. Identifying permanent savings will be challenging. While we will do what we can to reduce the impact those cuts will have on victims we serve, we have to acknowledge that it may impact service levels and will most certainly make it challenging to implement improvements. For the restitution fund backfill, the Department of Finance has told us that the general fund backfill to the restitution fund will be reduced this year. Cal VCB began receiving this backfill due to a decrease in funding available from the state penalty fund. Because of this decrease, the restitution fund was projected to be insolvent in fiscal year 2020-2021, and at that time started receiving transfers from the general fund. Since fiscal year 2022-23, those transfers have equaled $39.5 million per year. These transfers have allowed the restitution fund to build a modest reserve, and the reduction will largely spend down that reserve. Now, onto the Trauma Recovery Center grant program. As you recall, the TRCs are funded through the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Fund, money from the Restitution Fund, and currently general fund money from the Budget Act of 2022. The Safe Neighborhood and Schools Fund actually did increase by $698,000 in the May revise. However, in the May revision, there is a discussion of maximizing the pullback of one-time spending. This approach was more specifically outlined in a Department of Finance letter, which directed departments to immediately cease spending of one-time funds that meet certain criteria. The $2.2 million of general fund money provided to the TRCs in the Budget Act of 2022 does meet those criteria. Therefore, we do not currently believe we have the authority to spend those funds. That means that Cal VCB is planning to reduce the TRC grant amounts by just over $1.5 million for the 9 TRC grantees the board approved at the March meeting. At that meeting, the board gave Cal VCB the authority to make these adjustments. The $1.5 million reduction equates to about a 12% decrease, so we plan to reduce all awards by that amount. We did verify that even with these reductions, all 9 TRCs will receive enough funding to cover the salaries of the 3 statutorily required positions, which are a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a social worker. We plan to reach out to the TRCs to let them know about the new award amounts and ask them if they still want to accept funding. If a TRC declines the funding, Cal VCB will use that money to increase the grant awards for the other board-approved TRCs. The new grant agreements must be effective by July 1st, 2024 to prevent a lapse in service for the existing TRCs that are receiving a new grant award. Additionally, in the budget, in 2022, the legislature passed a budget trailer bill, AB 160, that would make a number of changes to Cal VCB statutes effective July 1, 2024. However, those changes were only to go into effect if it was determined there was a sufficient funding and appropriation was made to backfill the restitution fund for the cost of those changes. Those proposed changes included increasing reimbursement limits, suspending eligibility for income loss, and allowing violent felons to receive compensation while on supervised release. Compensation for erroneously convicted individuals also would have been increased. The May revise states that due to the negative multi-year budget forecast, these conditions have not been met and the changes are not included in the revised budget. That's our budget news. Wanted to also provide an update on a couple other items. Our joint powers contract, which will be part of the contract report in July. As you know, Cal VCB currently has 17 field offices across the state that process applications and bills for Cal VCB. These offices are operated by counties and the city of Los Angeles. We receive local assistance line item in the budget. We distribute that funding to the counties to perform the work of processing work outlined in a 3-year contract. We are currently negotiating these contracts, which require approval from County Board of Supervisors or the City Council. There's always a chance that local governments will choose not to renew these contracts. We think, given the current fiscal situation that's impacting not just the state, but cities and county governments, we wanted to let the board know that we are in the middle of those conversations with the cities and counties and who are going to maintain those contracts. If a local government chooses not to renew their contract, headquarters will redistribute the funding to another county or headquarters, and victims should not be impacted by any changes. And we will have more information on that at the next board meeting. I want to let you all know that we received confirmation from the Office of Administrative Law that the regulations we discussed at the January board meeting are complete, and those regulations will go into effect July 1st, 2024. April was a busy month for Cal VCB. It is both Sexual Assault Awareness Month and the month where we recognize National Crime Victims' Rights Week. In addition to participating in multiple crime victim focused outreach events, this year we also launched our statewide media campaign and are excited that we now have targeted advertisements across the state for Cal VCB. We're very excited about the launch, and we will continue to keep the board up to date on the marketing and next steps for the campaign. For Denim Day, Cal VCB staff collected 170 pieces of clothing for Community Against Sexual Harm, or CASH, the Sacramento-based nonprofit help victims of human trafficking. Last week, we dropped off the donations, and CASH staff and volunteers were very appreciative. We also got to tour their facilities, which provide services including a new health clinic, food pantry, and a children's room. Lastly, Cal VCB has also started our strategic planning process. We are developing a 4-year strategic plan that will guide the organization from 2025 through 2028. As part of this process, we are soliciting internal and external feedback. In late April, we shared a survey with our stakeholders to learn more about Cal VCB's area of excellence and opportunities for improvement. We also asked for suggestions on how to promote and implement diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the work that we do. We're also asking staff for their feedback on our core values, and we will use all of this information to help guide our strategic planning process. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Officer Gledhill. I think we saw the governor's May Revise press conference, and so the budget situation is known to us. It's a tough situation. We all heard last time from our TRC awardees about how these cuts impact them, and then to have additional cuts on top of it. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just a horrible budget situation, but it's very unfortunate that we're not going to be able to serve the communities in the way that we had hoped. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Chair, I have a couple of questions, and thanks for the update. I appreciate it. And I know that we have a real difficult budget year ahead of us, not just here, but all across state government. As you pointed out, Chair, that we're going to be reducing services in a lot of different places, not just here at VCB, and that's unfortunate. But it's the nature of our cyclical budget, unfortunately. One question I had regarding the TRCs, and it just refresh my memory on this, in voting to approve the grants, when we discussed the potential budget implications, did we agree to a universal haircut on those, or is that at the executive director's discretion in terms of managing any budget shortfall on this?
The board approved any adjustments that needed to be made for the TRCs based on the May revise, and so our plan with the 12% cut is to do across the board cut.
Okay. Meaning that, so we approved that, well, and again, apologies that I need the refresher here, but we approved the haircut, or the 12%, or the need to reduce, we didn't approve the number, but the potential need to reduce, but we didn't sort of discuss in detail how that might get it might impact individual awards.
Correct. And there have been years where the money has actually gone up in May, which is obviously not this year, but so the board approves the adjustment and the staff makes the decision about how that adjustment is implemented.
Okay. I guess I just wanted to ask a question about that, the approach for implementing this sort of haircut, I guess, is, we heard a lot of feedback that the volume of the awards was difficult, and that some of the applicants were hoping that we would reduce the number of awards and increase the individual awards, even in the initial round of applications and grants. And so in terms of revision here, are we convinced that the reduced amounts are going to be enough to support the programs adequately?
So obviously, what we looked at was, are the reduced amounts enough to fund the statutory required positions? And they are. And so then it becomes a decision for each individual TRC if they want to accept the grant award and use it as part of their overall funding, because we certainly hope that they're, receiving funding from other sources, or to say that we just don't think that that's enough, and then they have the option to reject the grant award.
And did, in that process, did you give thought to say, rather than giving a haircut, triaging the list overall and saying, hey, well, we're not awarding at the last eligible applicant?
We did, that would mean not funding current TRCs.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, just keep us apprised of the process, because again, we already heard that, from the applicants that the amounts that were in the awards were difficult for some of the existing TRCs to swallow in terms of not being enough funding, and then to cut that again by 12.5% is a tough pill to swallow, I think.
No, absolutely. We'll keep the board updated.
Appreciate that. And then the second thing was just on the strategic plan. Great to hear that process is going to get underway. And one of the things that we hear sort of time and time again from stakeholders here in this board meeting is just, the need for, and we heard it again today, obviously, is the need for opportunities for stakeholders to have their voices heard in this process. So I just wanted to get a sense from you. You mentioned a survey. Wanted to get a sense from you holistically. How do you see gathering that public feedback to inform the strategic plan?
So we have, mailing lists for, tens of thousands of stakeholders throughout the state. And so when we send out information, and we do it multiple times because we know, probably you need to hit people at multiple different times to make sure that they clicked on your information that you're looking for. So, we send it out to all of our stakeholders. I'm always in conversation with stakeholders and interest groups around the state and making sure that they're aware of the process. So we have a variety of methods of making sure that we're reaching those who are impacted by the work that we do.
Great. I appreciate that. And I think that, I don't know the best way to approach this, but I do know that when I get 500 emails in my inbox in a day, one from Cal VCB may get lost. And I appreciate the repeat outreach, but I would just encourage you and your direction to the staff just to do as much sort of tactile outreach as possible, in person, if possible, one-on-one, have conversations, if needed, workshops, whatever you think is needed to get that feedback, because it's not an easy process, and the people who are most impacted by this program don't have a lot of time in their schedule to write an extensive email or even respond to a survey, but they might have time for 10 minutes on a phone call or something like that. And so I guess I just, as a member of the board here, I'm interested in hearing as much as we can from those voices as we think about the direction of this operation in the next 3-5 years.
Thank you. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Is there any further comments or questions from the board?
Item 4 is the legislative update, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Katie Cardenas.
Good morning. The Senate and Assembly Appropriations Committees will both meet this morning to hear bills on the suspense file, which is for bills that are determined to have more than a negligible cost. At the hearings, the committees will determine whether these bills will move forward or be held in the committee for the remainder of the year. Due to the state's budget situation, fewer bills are expected to move forward than in prior years. Among the bills that will be heard today is AB 2307 by Assemblymember Davies, which would authorize CalVCB to reimburse up to $1,000 for self-defense courses offered, provided, or operated by a nonprofit organization, a university, or a law enforcement agency. SB 1430 by Senator Glazer will also be heard. This bill would require the Department of Justice to issue a certificate stating that an individual received either a finding of innocence from a court or an award of compensation for erroneous conviction from CalVCB. It would also require the Department of Justice to annotate the individual's criminal record with the same information. Additionally, AB 2979 by Assemblymember Mike Fong passed out of the Assembly Appropriations Committee on May 15th and was referred to the Assembly floor. That bill would clarify that victim compensation and Good Samaritan payments received under CalVCB are excluded from the definition of gross income in the Revenue and Taxation Code. Since it only contains clarifying language and has no fiscal effect, that bill was not required to be heard on suspense. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Deputy Cardenas. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Is there any public comment on this item via Zoom, here in Sacramento, or at the Martinez location? Seeing none, item 5 is the contract update, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Sean Ramirez.
Good morning. Today's contract report is informational and does not require any approvals from the board at this time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Ramirez. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Is there any public comment on this item via Zoom, here in Sacramento, or at the Martinez location? Seeing none, item 6 is the proposed updates to the mental health guidelines, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Vincent Walker.
Good morning. I'm here to propose an increase in the initial mental health session limits and updates to the mental health guidelines. The California Victims' Compensation Board has the authority, pursuant to Government Code Section 13957.2, to establish maximum rates and service limitations for reimbursement of mental health and counseling services. Reimbursement of mental health expenses by CalVCB is based on the definitions, session limitations, documentation requirements, and other criteria set forth in the mental health and counseling service maximum rates and service limitations for reimbursement, also known as our mental health guidelines. CalVCB established initial session limits in 2003 for claimants receiving reimbursement for mental health treatment. The limits were determined by CalVCB's staff clinical psychologists to control cost of mental health treatment and review the appropriateness of assessment-based treatment. The claimant's initial session limit is dependent on their filing status. Session limits were reviewed several times since implementation, with the last time being in 2015. Each review resulted in an increased session limit for 1 or 2 filing statuses. Currently, the initial limit for claimants with filing status of adult derivative, new caretaker, or roommate survivor is 15. The current filing status for minor derivative, minor witness, or parent caretaker is 30. And claimants with filing status of adult survivor, adult victim, minor survivor, or minor victim is 40. Once a claimant exhausts their initial session limit, an additional treatment plan must be submitted by the mental health provider, then reviewed and approved by CalVCB, primarily to ensure that the treatment provided is related to the crime and that the mental health guideline requirements are met. If the necessary criteria is met, CalVCB authorizes additional sessions beyond the claimant's initial sessions while not exceeding their maximum monetary benefit limit. For claimants with filing status of an adult derivative, minor derivative, new caretaker, roommate survivor, and minor witness, the maximum monetary limit is $5,000. All other filing statuses are given up to $10,000 for mental health expenses. And this is pursuant to Government Code Section 13957A2. For fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, CalVCB received 1,163 additional treatment plans submitted by mental health providers. 787 were first-time submissions, and 376 were at least the second request on an application. In review of applications received over the last 7 years in which mental health sessions were paid, CalVCB noticed that in each filing status, the initial session limit was exceeded and required completion of an additional treatment plan by a provider and reviewed and approved by CalVCB. Specifically, applications with filing statuses of adult derivative, new caretaker, or roommate survivor with an initial session limit of 15 were paid on average of between 19 and 27 total sessions. Applications with filing status of minor derivative, minor witness, or parent caretaker with initial session limits of 30 were paid an average of 40 to 54 total sessions. Applications with filing status of adult survivor, adult victim, minor survivor, or minor victim with an initial session limit of 40 were paid an average of 54 to 67 total sessions. All these session reimbursements were within the monetary cap of either $5,000 or $10,000 and based on their filing status. CalVCB proposes increasing the allowable initial mental health session limits for all filing status types, currently set at 15, 30, and 40, to 30, 50, and 60. These proposed increases will allow for continued services to victims without unnecessary delays and reduce the administrative requirements for providers by completing fewer additional treatment plans. CalVCB does not anticipate any increased fiscal impact as the total amount of mental health sessions reimbursed will not increase. If approved, these new session limits would apply to all applications filed and bills submitted on or after June 1st of 2024. CalVCB's second proposal is pursuant to Assembly Bill 1187, which took effect January 1, 2024, and grants certified child life specialists eligibility for reimbursement for providing treatment to CalVCB applicants. Each provider include only those who are certified by the Association of Child Life Professionals and are supervised by a licensed provider. Some background: licensed clinical social workers must have a master's degree in social work, registered as an associate clinical social worker, obtain 3,000 supervised hours, then pass the licensed clinical social worker clinical exam. CalVCB reimburses licensed clinical social workers $105 per hour for services provided to CalVCB claimants. Certified child life specialists must have a bachelor's degree in child life studies or related field, complete a 600-hour child life specialist internship, and pass the certification exam. Additionally, CalVCB surveyed several current certified child life specialist job postings and determined an average hourly rate for compensation being offered by employers for this provider type. CalVCB proposes adding certified child life specialist providers to the list of approved provider types who will be subject to the other terms and conditions set forth in the mental health guidelines as other qualified CalVCB mental health providers. CalVCB further proposes setting the reimbursement rate for certified child life specialist providers at $38 per hour. This reimbursement rate is based on the median hourly rate of 24 child life specialist jobs posting currently in California. This method of determining the hourly reimbursement rate is consistent with how the board has historically established rates for other types of providers. To effectuate this change, it is recommended that the provider rate chart it should be attachment A in your binder, be updated to add certified child life specialist providers. All proposed changes to the guidelines are depicted in, it should be an attachment B in your binder. All additions are noted in underline and all deletions appear in strike through. Cal VCB requests board approval to the proposed increase in the initial mental health session limits for all filing statuses. The addition of certified child life specialists as approved providers at the reimbursement rate set forth in attachment A, and adopt the changes to the mental health guidelines as set forth in attachment B. Upon adoption by the board, these updates will be submitted with the Secretary of State's office and required by Government Code Section 13957.2. Making these necessary updates will allow continued service to victims without unnecessary delays and ensure we comply with the recently enacted legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Deputy Walker. A couple of questions, things I want to make sure I understand and emphasize. First, so it sounds like this is all sub-regulatory. There's an APA exception, and we can just file this with the Secretary of State and then go.
Yes, that is correct.
Great. The second thing, so really all we're doing here is not necessarily increasing the overall visits that are likely to be approved. We're just conforming to existing practice and removing hoops that providers and victims have to jump through in order to get the services to which they're already entitled.
That is correct. We're reducing some of the administrative burden on our providers and then speeding up the process in which to get additional treatment sessions to our claimants.
Great. Well, I think that's a very welcome change. And then the last piece is really just amending the guidelines so they're consistent with this recently enacted legislation and including these new types of providers within the list of approved providers.
Yes, specific to a certified child life.
Great. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues on the board? Yes, Member Johnson.
Thank you very much for the explanation. I really appreciate this and all the work that went into it. I just had a quick minor question. You mentioned in the analysis that was included in the binder here that there were 1,163 ATPs received, 787 were first-time submissions, and 376 were at least second request. Does that mean that they had been denied the first request, or these are repeat requests but under the reimbursement limits?
These are additional requests asking for more mental health sessions or approval for more mental health sessions beyond their first additional treatment plan request.
So they can receive a first request beyond that and then go back and ask a second time for additional treatment if the initial ATP did not cover all treatment.
We see those in cases where the actual treatment plan that the provider is working with the claimant on, they didn't complete it or they didn't progress as quickly as they thought. So they're asking for additional sessions to complete that treatment plan.
Perfect. Great. Thanks for that clarification. And then the only other question I had was, how frequently do you find Cal VCB is denying an ATP or finding it lacking?
Most cases, only denials is if they're not complying with some of the mental health guidelines. It's not.
I think they want you closer to the mic, by the way.
That happens very rarely, and it's only when the provider is not complying with the requirements of the guideline.
Got it. So the reason I'm asking is I'm just trying to figure out this change without having to go through the ATP under these new limits, right? And go through that process. It is denying the staff an opportunity to say, hey, this doesn't really comply with our, regulations. So we wouldn't approve it, but it sounds like that doesn't happen very often anyway. So
when they get denied, we still have an opportunity if they go beyond the additional sessions that we're proposing. We do have an opportunity to require the provider to complete an additional treatment plan for review and approval at that time. But in most cases, there is not cause for a denial.
Great. Well, I am all for getting rid of paperwork so, and getting people treatment they need. So I really appreciate the effort here. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Do I have a motion to approve item 6?
Move to approve item 6.
Well, for a second.
Second,
Is there any public comment on this item via Zoom, here in Sacramento, or at the Martinez location?
Seeing none, Council, will you please call the roll?
The pending motion is adoption of the proposed changes to the mental health guidelines. Member Beckton,
aye.
Member Johnson,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes. Item 7 is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Abel Soto, which I will present. On January 29th of 2024, Mr. Soto submitted an application to the California Victim Compensation Board as an erroneously convicted felon. That application was supplemented twice and filed on March 25th of 2024. It is based on Mr. Soto's 2007 convictions for murder and 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. In January of 2024, the Los Angeles County Superior Court granted the joint petition filed by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office and counsel for Mr. Soto, dismissing the charges in the interest of justice and finding Mr. Soto factually innocent of all charges pursuant to Penal Code Section 1485.55. As mandated by the court order and pursuant to that same penal code section, the proposed decision recommends compensation in the amount of $909,720, which represents $140 per day for each of the 6,498 days Mr. Soto was wrongfully imprisoned. Mr. Soto, throughout these proceedings, has been represented by attorney Ellen Eggers, and the Office of the Attorney General is represented in these proceedings by Deputy Attorney General Dina Petroshenko, and Jessica Leal, I believe, on behalf of the Attorney General, is appearing today.
Thank you, Council. We will hear first from Ms. Eggers, counsel for Mr. Soto. Ms. Eggers, are you on the line? I don't know if it sounds like we don't have Ms. Eggers or Mr. Soto. So we will hear from Ms. Leal from the Attorney General's office.
Good morning. The Attorney General has no further comment on this claim. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leal. Is there any discussion on this item by the board? Do I have a motion on item 7?
I move to adopt the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Abel Soto.
I second.
Is there any public comment on this item via Zoom, here in Sacramento, or at the Martinez location?
Seeing none, Council, please call the roll.
The motion for consideration is adoption of the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Abel Soto. Member Beckton,
Aye.
Member Johnson,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Council. So we're about to go into closed session, but before we do, I just want to commend the work of the hearing officers in both the 4900 cases as well as the Victim Compensation Program cases. These are often extremely complex, both factually and legally, and they're very easy for me as a board member to understand and to formulate my questions and my opinions about them. So really great work on those. But the board will now convene into closed session under Government Code Section 11126 sub C3 to discuss numbers 1 through 104 of the Victim Compensation Program. board is now reconvening into open session under Government Code Section 11126, sub C3. Do I have a motion for numbers 1 through 104 of the Victim Compensation Program?
I move approval of numbers 1 through 104 of the Victim Compensation Program.
I'll second that motion.
Council, please call the roll.
Motion for consideration is approval of numbers 1 through 104 of the Victim Compensation Program. Member Becton,
Aye.
Member Johnson,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Is there any other business that needs to come before the board today? Seeing and hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move the meeting be adjourned.
I second.
Member Becton,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We'll see you in the hot Sacramento summer.